Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show how we make fabric twine from strips of fabric. Now, the beauty of this project is you can use scraps of fabric and you can tailor the twine colors to whatever you really want. I prefer to use a light and a dark contrasting color. It kind of reminds me of candy canes, but you can use any color combination you like. From there, I use it like cording in my slow stitching pieces. I can make long lengths and special colors. And here's my process. So fabric twine is essentially fabric rope, and it's made out of fabric. You can also use yarn, but just little thin strips. So it's kind of scrappy. You can save your little thin scraps that you might not use for other projects and turn it into this really kind of durable cording. And I find it really effective if you have contrast, so a white or a light with a color. Now you can use patterns as well. You don't have to just use fabric. I used velvet ribbon here. Here I used fabric, two different fabrics. And you don't have to make it specific. So this is only using white and that red fabric, but you don't have to do that. For example, this long cording that I have that I just continue to add strips of fabric to as I go is just a bunch of things. So it starts out white, and then I have white and purple, and then I have white and blue and teal, white and red, orangey red, white and gold, and then white and bright red. And I can continue this further if I wanted. But the beauty of this is you get this very interesting result, this kind of rustic twine. So to start with, we need our fabric. So let's get started with that. Now to make fabric twine, it's quite forgiving and you have a lot of options. You can take your fabric, and here I have some long strips because I prefer working with the long strips, but you don't have to by any means, and I'll show you the different techniques for joining strips. But what I do like to do is really emphasize having contrasting colors. So this one, even though it's striped, it has a lot of white in it. So this will be my white or my light, and this one has a bunch of colors, and it'll make a really interesting effect. First thing you want to do is cut it into strips. Now you can also tear it. So to tear it, I would just take my fabric, make a small little cut, the approximate width that I want it. And some people suggest 1-inch strips. I like it even smaller, maybe 1/2 inch. So if I'm going to tear it, I just cut it about 1/2 inch to get it started, and then I tear it. Now it will tear straight, but perhaps my fabric wasn't cut straight. So that's why it's uneven. So at this point, I would just trim that up. I would just take my scissors and trim it approximately. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm just trimming it so I get that raw edge on one side. And then what I like to do when I tear it is I just pull any of the fraying that exists right away, or I'll even just give it a little snip to clean it up. And I can do this as I go, or I can do this ahead of time. Now, conversely, if you'd like to cut your fabric, it will produce somewhat neater result. So I like to fold my fabric so I just have less mess. And again, I just go for a thin cut. It's easy with the fabric that has a pattern or lines because I can just really just match up the lines and use that as my guide. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. So I'll just fold my fabric down, and I'll just cut over here. Now I'm cutting it the length of the stripes, but that's not necessary. So then I have 2 strips. One's cut, so the edge is a little neater, and one is torn, so it's more frayed, and that's totally fine. The one thing you want to make sure is that your strips are different lengths, and automatically, because I used 2 different strips of fabric, that's the way it worked out. Before we get started though, I want to show you 4 methods of joining additional lengths of fabric so that you can continue with your project as long as you want. So to join my fabric pieces, you can just use the tuck, and I'll show you that when we actually start our fabric spinning. But there are other methods you can use. You can always just use a knot. So you take the 2 pieces of fabric at the ends, lay them on top of each other, and then create a knot. Just like this. Make it nice and snug. And then you can trim these ends somewhat. Now, this is a very easy way to join fabric together The trouble is it creates a little bit of bump in your twine, and that may not be desirable. You might not mind it, and it's an easy way to continue to make the fabric yarn. Another method that's very similar to this method is you take your 2 strips of yarn, and I like to use the thicker ends if I have them of my strips of yarn. I place them right on top of each other, and then I fold them down maybe 2 inches or so down so that I have all 4 layers of fabric here on the fold, and I just make a little slit right down the center. And then I can take my 2 pieces of fabric, both that have that hole in it, and I stick one inside the other. And then I take that opening, and it's basically a lanyard knot, and I'll feed my fabric through, and now my pieces are attached. Now once again, using this method, there'll be a little bump in your work. And again, if you don't want this bump, then you want to try the other 2 methods. The third method that I like to use, because I don't always like to just feed the fabric through, is I just take the fabric and lay it on top of each other. But this way I don't lay it on top of each other the way we did with the knots, so that they're both facing down. I turn it the other way. I want to have maybe a 2-inch overlap between pieces. And then I just take a needle and thread, and I start at the bottom here, and then I just stitch small stitches going across to really anchor it in place. I'll do maybe 10 stitches or so, or really whatever the number that you want. You don't really need all 10, but I'll just make these little stitches because I want it to hold it in place the length of that overlap. When I get to the end of that area where the 2 stitches overlap, I'll just do a couple more here. What I like to do is fold my fabric in half and then just end it with a couple of stitches holding that fabric folded in half. I can just do a couple of little stitches here. And this prevents that bulk of that knot that we made with the other 2 methods. When I get to the end, I'll just knot off my thread. Now you don't have to do this connection ahead of time. You can do these connections as you're doing your fabric spinning. And then I'll show you the final method, which is the method most people use, where you just fold your fabric in and continue to spin. So let's get started with our twine spinning. So I have the 2 original strips that I made, the one that I cut and the one that I tore. To start with, I want to just make a knot. So I put the pieces right on top of each other, and then I just fold a knot right up top. You can do 1 or 2, it doesn't matter. You just want to maintain that opening, and later on we'll trim this down. Now you want to do something to anchor your piece. You can either put it on a clipboard to hold it down, or you can take a clip and hold it down, but this will move around, especially in the beginning when you start your spinning. So I like to use a clipboard. And again, just understand that it might continue to move around. I might pull it around, and the clipboard might move. So if you want to put something heavy on the clipboard, that's another way to go. So I have my 2 yarns in one hand and the other. My dark is in my left and the light is in the right. So I spin it, and then I take the dark and I fold it over the one on the right. And now I have the spun in my left and this unspun in my right. So I'm just going to spin that around a little bit on the right hand side, and then I wrap the left hand side over it. So now I'll just take it and spin it a little more on the right hand side, and again swap it over just like this. And I'll continue doing this as I go. Now, as I move it, I run out of area that I've spun, so I just twist it some more and fold it over. And I continue doing this, always spinning it and twisting it in the same way, which is away from me. And I do that for both of them. I make sure they're both twisting in the same direction. And I just continue doing this. To get a lot of fabric twine, it takes a lot of spinning and a lot of fabric in length, but that's the process for making the fabric twine. The beauty is that you can really choose the colors of fabric you want to use, so you can really personalize it and make it useful for a particular project. Now, I'll continue to spin this and twist this and wrap it over it as I go. You can use the fabric twine, if you make enough of it, as ribbon for wrapping gifts, which is very fun. And you can use it in place of cording. So you can use it as the drawstring for a hoodie or a pair of shorts if you wanted. I use it as a decorative element in my slow stitching because I think that interest, that thick rustic twine, is certainly unique. So this is one way that you can use your fabric twine in your work. Here I just attached it kind of in a little snake-like design, and then I did the couching stitch on it. So it can be used in slow stitching quite effectively. So I've shown you two methods for joining more fabric, because all this time I've made just this length, 8 to 10 inches of twine, and now I want to continue it until I come to the end, or maybe 2 to 3 inches of the end of this darker fabric. So I'll move this down, continue spinning, and I'll speed this along until I get to the end of that fabric. If you need to stop and take a break, just clip it off with your clip right on the fabric, and then when you come back and you resume, just continue spinning it in the same direction. If you feel like you're not getting enough grip on the fabric with your fingers, just spritz your fingers with water or dip them in a small bowl of water, and that water will give you a little more grip. I'm almost at the end of my dark colored fabric. We always want to maintain one strip considerably longer than the other. We don't want them to be the same length. So once I have maybe 4 inches left, I'll clip off the end of my twine on the area that it's twisted, and I want to add additional fabric and join it up with this piece. Now I've showed you the methods where I use the knot or the lanyard knot or sewing, which gives a nice sturdy result, but it does result in a little bump. One way to attach additional fabric without any of that, without knots or creating more of a bump, is to take the end of your fabric and open it up flat. Now because I used frayed fabric, there's a little bit of string here, so I just want to pull that apart, maybe even clip that, just to neaten it up. And now I want to take the open end of the other fabric that I have that I want to attach, and I'll just overlap them maybe 3 inches or so. And I fold the existing fabric on the outer piece of the new fabric that I'm adding, so it's sandwiched in there quite nicely. With my right hand, I'm just going to start twisting again away from me, and I'm holding down the area where it's overlapped in fabric right now. This is going to be the weakest point of our twine currently because it's just placed on top there, just folded in place. But now I want to continue that process, taking that other fabric, spinning it, and folding it on top, just like we did before. The only difference is I'm going to pay a lot of attention to holding the area of the new joined fabric together so that we don't lose the twist here that's holding it in place. And I'll just continue twisting and overlapping the fabric just like I did before. And I'll go the length until I'm happy with the result. I want to make sure that I always go over the length of that new fabric, that joined fabric. And I don't really want to let go until I know it's steady and secure by having twisted and overlapped it quite a ways. Again, I'm always twisting away from me on both of these fabric pieces. So I'll continue twisting this. When I get to the end of this strip here, I'll show you how I finish off the fabric twine. So once I have about 4 inches left, this is usually where I want to stop with my fabric. If I wanted to continue and just weave in and spin in another strip of fabric to this one, I would just do that same procedure. But when I'm completely done, or even when I'm at a point where I want to stop, I hold my twisted fabric together, and I don't worry about the remaining pieces quite yet. I'm going to save them because I think I want to continue adding on this strip. And all I do is I make a knot, and I make sure that knot encompasses all of the twisted fabric. And then I'm just going to pull it snug. I'll release it from the end here, and now I have my fabric twine. I like to store it just by wrapping it around, and in this case I have my extra that hasn't been spun yet, so I'll just store that next to it. But the result is some beautiful fabric twine that you can use in your work. So that's how I make fabric twine. I've showed you 4 methods of attaching different strips to your fabric twine to make it as long as you want. Just find the one that works for you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.